Maybe we can start, Marco, Luca?
Yeah,
okay.
We can begin. Yes.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our weekly seminar. Today's guest is Elena Irrera, professor of political philosophy at the University of Bologna. She studied in the United Kingdom, where she earned his PhD in Asian philosophy at Durham's University. She was also a lecturer in Asian philosophy and ethics at the University of Warwick and honorary research fellow at Durham. Elena's research interest is Greek philosophy, especially Aristotle's Politics and Ethics, and his connection with the ideal of beauty and the relation with political institution theories of happiness. She's actually working on the concept of respect and tolerance in ancient, modern, and contemporary political philosophy, with particular focus to their normative value and their ties to social justice, which is the topic of today's seminar. Elena, we are very glad to have you here with us and ready to hear you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much, Achille, for your very generous introduction, and good morning, everyone. I am really delighted to be here with you today, and I would really like to thank the members of the Center for Advanced Studies of University of Rijeka for their kind invitation. Now, what I would like to provide today is a very generic overview of my research, which is still in progress, on the topic of solidarity, which admits of a plurality of theoretical, normative, and broadly speaking, philosophical articulations. And I would like to start by introducing some preliminary remarks about methodology and the kind of approach I use in studying solidarity. Actually, the title I have chosen for today's presentation is The Languages of Solidarity, which is specifically meant to suggest that we cannot speak of solidarity in univocal terms. And even if we could assume that solidarity is a distinctively philosophical ideal, there are, of course, various parts of exploration and philosophical approaches to take into consideration. So I'm thinking, for instance, of political theory, which might adopt more analytic tools, or history of philosophy and history of ideas. And actually what I'm trying to do is to offer a broadly conceived political philosophical perspective on solidarity, which might somehow incorporate both aspects of political theory and aspects of history of philosophy. And today I would like to make special references to two philosophers and sociologists like Habermas and also Aristotle. Actually, as Achille said, I have studied ancient philosophy, and I'm trying to look at possible ways in which ancient political and ethical thought might somehow give new perspectives on contemporary political problems. So basically, what I would like to concentrate on is on the relationships between solidarity and justice. In particular, I would like to show that solidarity might be regarded as corresponding to justice, but at the same time, not as a synonym of justice. In other words, I think that solidarity might be an intellectual lens through which we might consider a higher level of justice. Justice conceived at a local level, regional, national, but also transnational, for instance, European, and why not even global. So my idea, well, one of the ideas I would like to propose is that solidarity might be regarded as a sort of empowered justice. And secondly, I would also like to consider some procedural implications of the ideal of justice. Now, I have here a PowerPoint presentation. Actually, I hope to be able to upload it. It's not working, just a second. Okay. Right. I hope you can see the presentation. So basically, I have added some working questions. First of all, can we conceptualize solidarity as a non-supererogatory ideal, which is something different from sheer top-down benevolence? So what's the problem here? Before giving a provisional definition of solidarity, we should keep in mind that many examples, many uses of solidarity have to do with the idea of benevolence, altruism, something which is not strictly required by duties of justice. So my idea, well, my question is, could we consider solidarity as a proper duty of justice, or even as a principle trying to guide the implementations of duties of justice? Second, can it be a moral or legal duty of justice? Could solidarity be understood as a normative power, not only, as an inspiring value, but also and especially as a source of obligations of justice towards individuals and groups? And third, would solidarity be the qualifying trait, the object of specific obligations of justice? So when we speak about justice, especially in liberal political thought, we tend to consider an ideal alongside values like toleration and respect, which might be theorized as values somehow capable of offering a view of democratic legitimacy. Now, in the case of solidarity, could solidarity contribute alongside toleration and respect to the elaboration of specific obligation of justice? And if the answer to question number 2 is yes, who are the suppliers of solidarity? People, institutions, or societies? So these are questions we should need to explore. Here I am just skipping the other questions, but I'm mainly summarizing them. So if solidarity corresponds to justice, are they synonyms? Well, my idea, as I have explained, is not only that solidarity can offer a stronger way of thinking of justice, for instance, in relation to the idea of community, but solidarity might also be an inspiring ideal for policies of justice in the making. So solidarity might somehow offer a wider perspective on problems which need to be qualified as problems of justice. Okay, so basically, I am trying to explore solidarity in the sense of a value which has to do with the not yet. So not only with what is already justice, but also with is not yet justice and might somehow become a duty of justice. So my main working assumptions is that solidarity can be regarded as a heuristic principle, one able to inspire and shape policies, which in their turn are designed to redress social, cultural, and political inequalities, but also, as I said, as an ideal able to arouse moral and political obligations in specific contexts. So my idea is that solidarity is justice within a community. By community here, I am not referring to the Rawlsian idea of community as a homogeneous association in which people are sharing substantive values of justice. We might even speak of communities as realities in which people, of course, share specific and generic rules of justice. Nevertheless, communities might be hospitable to differences. And this might be a theater for reciprocal interaction and expression, and also respect, of course, of differences. So drawing on Habermas, my idea is that solidarity has to do with justice within a community. So even if we had to think of justice in global terms, the idea of community as a sort of orientative ideal and perception of where we belong to is important and should be considered. One thing I would like to stress is the idea that respect and solidarity are generally regarded as interrelated values, but also as conceptually distinct values. Once again, respect might have to do with impersonal attitudes of recognition of individual and group dignity, whereas solidarity, as I have just said, might have to do with dignity and recognition within a community. Now, what is the broad thesis for today's presentation? Solidarity, well, the first thesis is that solidarity might not necessarily be compulsory in its own right. So we might not think of a proper duty of solidarity, but an education to solidarity and appeals to solidarity in the sphere of political communication might point to the urgency of interpreting specific claims of aid and support as real issues of political justice. I don't have a clear view yet, but my idea is that there is no duty of justice, an overarching duty of justice, solidarity, but solidarity might inspire duties of justice. And solidarity might be invoked as an ideal able to open new spaces of interdependence and promises scenarios for a respect-based integration of diversity. Solidarity might also be an attitude, not only a value enshrined in treatises, but it might presuppose the capacity and the willingness to activate specific acts of recognition and response to specific forms of vulnerability by way of coordinated sets of actions, especially in times of crisis. Now, let us provide a very generic definition of solidarity. Here I am using the insights of Every Kohlers and Arto Laitinen and CAS SEE, who wrote books on solidarity. We might say that the word solidarity, which is generally used in informal context of discussion to indicate a subjective habit or inclination to provide help to people who find themselves in condition of vulnerability, difficulty, and distress, as an attitude which might incorporate display of feelings of benevolence, and it might even presuppose a human capacity for mental and emotional representation of the difficulties experienced by specific human beings. So solidarity, at least from an operational point of view, might have to do with specific situations of vulnerability or crisis. Now, we might introduce some conceptual articulations concerning solidarity towards vulnerable people. We might consider solidarity with a group of people. Here I am following David Miller, who is talking about solidarity with a group of people as a non-reciprocal form of solidarity. So the example he gives is that of 1970s Britain. In 1970s Britain, the Chile Solidarity campaign, set up in response to the military coup led by Pinochet, acted in support of those Chilean people victimized by the new regimes, holding demonstrations, lobbying the British government, and offering practical aid. But this example is an example of showing solidarity with. When we talk about solidarity among people, we actually talk about a reciprocal form of solidarity, which might be even instantiated in the domain of political and public communication. Here I am using the word political and public communication in very broad terms. They might include also the capacity of different and the right of different spheres of society to be integrated into a debate. Now we can also talk about horizontal solidarity and vertical solidarity. By vertical solidarity, we generally refer to the top-down solidarity, which is shown by institutions and their representatives towards common people, either citizens or people who, despite not being citizens, might advance some specific request of recognition. and a horizontal solidarity, which can be framed in terms of a solidarity between the members of a certain community, or at least not between governors and governed. And here, in this respect, here I am referring to Sally Scholz, the author of a book on political solidarity. Basically, Scholz distinguishes within the sphere of horizontal solidarity between a solidarity between people who do not share any specific form of distress and vulnerability. And she calls this kind of solidarity social solidarity. And a horizontal solidarity between people who undergo some specific form of oppression. And she calls this sort of solidarity political solidarity. Actually, I'm not going to follow these distinctions, but I simply wanted to show you how the intellectual academic panorama is offering possible conceptualizations of horizontal and vertical solidarity. Right. There is also another important distinction. This is proposed by the sociologist, not the philosopher, Jody Dean. In 1992, she develops a sociological model of solidarity called reflective solidarity, which she distinguishes from another model called affective solidarity. What is an affective kind of solidarity? Jody Dean tells us that affective solidarity is an attitude which displays an emotional component. It has to do with forms of mutual benevolence, typical of people who already share situations of vulnerability, but also specific projects which do not necessarily involve situations of particular emergency. When we talk, by contrast, about reflective solidarity, we are talking about a category which might help political thinkers in devising new ways of thinking of solidarity as a principle of legitimacy of liberal democracies. What is reflective solidarity for Jolie Dean? Well, first of all, she doesn't claim that solidarity or reflective solidarity is a political duty. But we might talk about reflective solidarity as a sort of communicative attitude, which is displayed, it might be displayed especially in the public sphere or in the sphere of political deliberation. And it has to do with the advancement, the introduction of specific claims of recognition, and it involves a progressive modification and accommodation of individual positions. So reflective solidarity might have to do with an interaction which leads to shared frameworks of deliberation. And this is, in my opinion, a very important category, which somehow resembles other insights which have been proposed by Jürgen Habermas. So my idea is that if we had to think of solidarity as an ideal having a deontic dimension, so if solidarity can somehow inspire obligations or duties of justice, then we might think of this specific kind of solidarity in liberal democracies, a solidarity which allows people showing distress to express their views and requests of recognition. One thing I wanted to say about the possibility of understanding solidarity as a duty has to do with the etymology of the word. Well, actually, the word comes from the Latin soliditas. Soliditas is a concept which has been used in various fields of thought, even in architecture. Soliditas has to do with cohesion, with unity, with strength and stability. But there is also another etymological sense of solidity, of soliditas, which has to do with Roman jurisprudence. In Roman law, soliditas emerges as a specification of a particular type of obligations. The obligation which gets structured between people who ask for some money they have already lent and people who are the debtors. So basically, there is a bond between debtors and creditors in practices of debt repayment. Now, the obligatio in solidum is a really complex concept, which I'm not able to explain here. But what we might derive from this inspiration, etymological inspiration, is the idea that in the obligatio in solidum, we have either one creditor or a group of people who needs to have their money back. And we have people who are debtors. It might be a group of people. And according to the obligatio, the persons who asks money, who wants to be repaid, might ask any one of the whole group of debtors. So each person, each member of the specific group of debtors has the responsibility, but also the legal duty to repay the whole debt, if asked, for the whole group. So this idea shows that solidarity has to do with groups. Here, the vulnerable people are actually the debtors, but even between the idea of vulnerable people, there is the idea of sharing and paying for the whole. So there is a call for a sense of responsibility, which is not only moral, but also legal. Now, who are the requesters of solidarity? Well, first of all, there might be people who request solidarity by themselves. They experience directly specific forms of vulnerability and distress, but there might also be people like advocates of political causes who do not directly experience this difficulty and vulnerability. In that case, let's concentrate on the advocates of these political causes. Well, first of all, we might think that these people speak on behalf of those who are experiencing the difficulty. On behalf of, here I am following every callers, on behalf of means that the subjects who are asking for solidarity might both describe a situation of distress and also suggest practicable strategies, specifically in the same way in which people directly involved would elaborate the issue. So this is according to every caller's what it means to speak on behalf of those people. Whereas in the name of those people might imply that people who are advancing claims in support of others might express their personal elaboration of the difficulty experienced by others. So the conceptual distinction is there, okay? This is just, as I said, a possible conceptual articulation. But we should not rule out the possibility that even people who are advancing requests in the name of vulnerable people, this is not to exclude that they can communicate with each other by way of specific public interactions modeled and shaped by values like solidarity. Now, here I just for the sake of clarity, I conceptualize it. I work out the distinctions between performers of solidarity, those who express solidarity, and addressees of solidarity, those who are the beneficiaries of solidarity. And basically, what we might consider in requests of solidarity is a set or a subset of requests that might be implicit. So we might think of requests of solidarity as requests for specific forms of need or vulnerability. But besides these specific needs, for instance, a fairer distribution of material goods or recognition of rights, we might find a more foundational recognition. People invoking solidarity might ask for a recognition of their dignity as human beings and groups in a special state of vulnerability. So this might be a possible ground of difference between respect recognitions and solidarity recognition. most importantly, at least in my opinion, when we conceptualize solidarity, we might also consider a request by the addressees of solidarity to adopt, now the request is addressed to the representatives of institutions, a request to adopt an attitude of non-indifference towards their problem. And most importantly, we might also consider a request to examine and take a problem as a shared one. So there is the idea, sorry, of sharing, which is not necessarily included in the idea of respect, which might be more impersonal. So other requests or calls might have to do with the institution's sense of responsibility in offering a political solution to specific problems. And there might also be a demand for the creation of bonds of political communication independently of the decisional outcomes. So if we consider solidarity as a value informing public communication, we don't necessarily have to assume that people need or have to respond to requests specifically in the same way in which people desire it. So we might have a demand for a creation of communications, a bond of political communication, which might be valuable independently of the specific solutions which are actually produced. So this is my main idea. Now, I would like to show some examples of how solidarity intervenes in the European Union, or at least in foundational treaties. Here, even before talking about the European Union, we might have a look at the preamble on the treaty, establishing the European Coal and Steel Community, signed in 1951. So let's read here. Convinced that the contribution which an organized and vital Europe can make to civilization is indispensable to the maintenance of peaceful relations. So here we have, first of all, a remark on an organized and vital Europe. So it's not simply a Europe which considers people as abstract entities. It is vital. And let's go on, recognizing that Europe can be built through practicable achievements, which will first of all create real solidarity, and through the establishment of common basis for economic development. And then the preamble goes on. So I focused on this specific sentence. So the idea that practical achievements will create a solidarity de facto. This is also claimed and declared in the Schuman Declaration of the 9th of May of 1950. Schuman says a united Europe was not achieved and we had war. Europe will not be made and created all at once, but not according to a single plan, but it will be formed through progressive and concrete measures. So one idea we might derive from this specific preamble and also from the Schuman Declaration is that an attitude of solidarity might be the outcome of a habit to perform specific measures and actions of solidarity. In this respect, I think we might draw a comparison between this approach and the Aristotelian approach. Here, I'm not going to talk about Aristotle, but what I can say is that for Aristotle, virtue is an aptitude, it is an individual attitude, but it might also be conceived as justice. Justice for Aristotle is a set of attitudes. So basically, an attitude is created by the repetition or by the constant performance of specific actions. So if we want to theorize an idea of solidarity as an attitude enshrined in documents and foundational treatises, but nevertheless as an attitude, we should first start by an education. So the idea of education is fundamental in this respect. And here there are other passages in the Treaty of Maastricht. We read desiring to deepen the solidarity between their peoples while respecting history, culture, and tradition. Here we have the idea that solidarity does not necessarily have to do with a homogeneity of views. It might be hospitable and respectful of differences, especially in multicultural societies or in states governed by liberal principles. And basically it has to do with policies and forms of cooperation. So perhaps the idea of solidarity, more than sheer justice understood as obedience by law or respect, which has to do with impersonal recognition of rights, might have to do with cooperation within a shared endeavor. So even if there is disagreement, of course, which is natural in liberal societies, as John Rawls says, nevertheless, there might be the idea that we are striving towards common goals, which is a well-functioning state. So in this respect, cooperation might stress the need of solidarity. Here, the last thing I wanted to show about foundational treatises. In the Treaty of Lisbon of 2007, we read that the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law and respect of human rights. But solidarity is kept separate from these values. So basically, in the Title I Common Provisions, Article 2, we read that rights are respected in a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, and solidarity and equality are in place. So here, solidarity as well as other values might somehow protect rights. Here I am thinking, for instance, of John Rawls, who in A Theory of Justice speaks about the principle of fraternity. He's not specifically talking about solidarity, but he speaks about a principle which we should adopt, because without this principle, we might lose sight of the importance of rights and justice. So solidarity might be regarded as a sort of protective shield for other sorts of values. And in the last 5 minutes, can I have 5 minutes or? It's up to you. I don't know whether.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. I just wanted to say something about Jürgen Habermas, who has dealt a lot with solidarity. Basically, Habermas has not addressed solidarity since the beginning of his reflection. At the very beginning, we tried to identify shared principle of communicative agency in various contexts of human interaction. He's famous for his theories of mutual understanding, the ethics of discourse, and the values that should inspire an ethics of discourse. Basically, Habermas starts from Kantian premises. So he proposes to reconstruct a moral point of view which every rational and autonomous person could will as the principle of a universal normatively binding legislation. But at the same time, well, actually, on the other hand, he also talks about the possibility of establishing fruitful interactions, communicative interactions within specific contexts between people having different cultures. And this involves an exchange in views, which has to do also with the premises people adopt in their communicative agency. Now, in the first books and essays, especially in the ethics of discourse, Habermas actually says, I'm not speaking of concrete political revolutionary principles. Solidarity might have to do with revolution. I'm thinking, for instance, of Hannah Arendt. He says, I am simply interested in offering a deontological and communicative theory. So I'm working in the field of metaethics. But then, and here I would like to show one passage from an essay published in 1986, Justice and Solidarity. Here, Habermas is discussing a theory of moral development elaborated by the psychologist Kohlberg. Basically, Kohlberg believes that there are 6 stages in human development. They might be divided into three different phases. A pre-conventional, for instance, when children obey by the parents' authority. Then there is a conventional phase in which people grow up and they try to behave according to laws, especially because they feel ashamed of the consequences of possible bad behavior. And then there is a further phase, a post-conventional phase, distinguished into two stages. And stage number 6 is the stage in which people realize that justice is important for its own sake. And within this stage, Kohlberg, but also Habermas, identified the possibility that people realize deficits of justice. And in this case, solidarity might help to create new forms of justice. And what is interesting is that in this essay, Habermas says that solidarity is the reverse coin of justice. Basically, he understands this principle in terms of global justice. He says, if we want to speak of a universal form of justice, then we have to consider that we are part of a community. So solidarity is not only a complement to justice when justice is flowed, but it is also a perspective in the light of which we might look at justice within a community. And the main idea, and this idea is also taken by Aristotle. Aristotle actually does not talk of solidarity, but he elaborates this important notion, which is philia, friendship. And he talks about political friendship as a principle orienting justice. Both Habermas and Aristotle, here I'm drawing a comparison between ancients and contemporary thinkers, both thinkers stress the idea that morality and politics have to do with community. So even if Habermas adopts a Kantian approach, he tries to escape the criticism to which he has been amenable by many people who have claimed that he was not stressing the sphere of specific ethos of individuals who are communicating. And similarly for Aristotle, political friendship is a kind of value which lawgivers should try to instantiate in politics. Aristotle talks about, well, he actually takes up a commonsensical view, but he seems to subscribe to this view. And he says that lawgivers should pay more attention to friendship than to justice. What might this mean? In my opinion, the justice here is talking about has to do with formal subscription to laws. But if we feel that we are friends to each other, we might, from a motivational point of view, be more prone to act according to justice. Aristotle says justice and friendship coincide, but if we are friends, we don't need justice. So we might take this ideal to prefigure an ideal of solidarity, which of course does not obscure duties of justice, but enforces duties of justice, not only from a substantive point of view, but also from the point of view of procedures. And I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you too. It's a wonderful relation. It was really interesting to follow. I think that there are many points of discussion, but for our fellows, are there any questions or stuff you would like to share?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Gabriel, sure.
Sorry, I cannot put the video, the camera on. Is it okay?
Yes, no problem.
Thank you very much for this. It's very. I'm not in. I don't study political theory, but yeah, it's very interesting to hear this, and I'm always interested in this kind of discussions. I'm just curious about maybe a clarification more than a question. when you mentioned, because I didn't, when you mentioned, for example, a distinction between affective solidarity and reflective solidarity. Of course, you mentioned an author. I don't remember the name of the author, and of course I didn't read the book, so I'm sure that there's a more complex description of this distinction. But it just, to me, it sounded a bit as again a kind of distinction between irrationalism and rationalism, which, well, also I find problematic. But you know, there's a lot of other thinkers that might find this a bit problematic. So my question is, if you could maybe a bit clarify a bit more this. I mean, what interests me really is can we really make such a distinction? And if we can, or let's put it the other way around, if we cannot clearly make this distinction, how would this influence, like policy making, or even theoretical work on justice and solidarity? Of course, I mean, you kind of, I think that you kind of, in a way, you answered in a bit. You answered a bit when you were referring to Habermas, and of course to he always, like, he tries to qualify, let's say, his theory, his abstract approach by always saying that, of course, we have to not forget that we are bound to a shared sense of community and belonging. So maybe that's that would be the way to compromise this. But I don't know. Nice to hear you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabriel, for this very interesting question. Actually, Jolie Dean wrote an essay. It was not properly a book, so she just offered conceptual distinctions, which she develops in other fields of sociology. So these conceptual distinctions, as she says, are purely theoretical, but they might somehow interact with each other. So Jolie Dean speaks about affective solidarity primarily in terms of an emotional component, which might emerge between the members of a specific group who are sharing specific concepts, values, habits, but also forms of distress. And she talks about this sort of solidarity as not only emotional, but also as exclusionary. So she claims that we might identify this kind of solidary attitudes in groups which are not inclined to interact and open themselves to new perspectives. Of course, I don't agree with this framework. I think it's quite, well, it is an oversimplification, especially because if we consider reflective solidarity, I don't think that reflective solidarity should dispense with an emotional component. In fact, here, I mean, my project, my work is still in progress, but I would like to interiorize not only insights from Habermas' theory of mutual understanding, but also insights from the Aristotelian view that communication between human beings endowed with reason and logos cannot dispense with emotions. For Aristotle, virtues, the virtue which encourages us and binds us to justice, is not only the outcome of a repetition of actions, it is the specific result of shaping, orienting, and cultivating an emotional component in the direction of reason. So it is true that Jolie Dean draws this distinction between reflective solidarity on the one hand, which is very rational, and affective solidarity, which, as you said, might somehow verge towards irrationality. But in my opinion, this does not clarify the complexity of words, societies, forms of communications, and also possibilities of reciprocal amelioration. I don't know whether I have answered your question, but basically I tend to agree with you. There is the risk of using a conceptual distinctions that might be an oversimplification, that might underestimate the potentiality of emotions and also of rational communication in the public sphere. Here I'm using Habermasian concept. Thank you.
Very, very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriel. There's someone else? Well, maybe I can with an observation. Well, when you talk, Elena, about the idea of community, if I understand correctly, community is a theater of difference. It seems to be that this idea maybe comes to Aristotle politics. Well, maybe you can say more about this idea.
Sure, thank you very much, Achille. It's a very useful question because it allows me to clarify something about Aristotle. Generally, when we refer to Aristotelian community, we tend to believe that the Aristotelian koinonia is a wonderful place where people share values. Actually, this is not the case. The koinonia, and here you are absolutely right for Aristotle, is a theater of disagreement. In Politics, Book 1, Aristotle talks about man as a political animal, endowed with logos, but also immersed in a dimension of interaction in which each person has, and here is using a specific Greek word, aistesis, each person has a perception of justice, like a sensation which nevertheless should be informed by logos. So if we are allowed to use the idea of public sphere for Aristotle, the community is the theater of interaction and possible convergence in goals and strategies. And not by chance, when Aristotle talks about political friendship, he's not talking about sharing, loving each other, and so on. He says political friendship is concord. It is a sort of homonoia of agreement on who should rule. So it is a procedural idea. It doesn't have to do with specific norms of justice. So real political friendship occurs when we try to establish an agreement. Well, Aristotle is not using the idea of institutions. He's talking about political leaders. But we might apply this idea in contemporary times and offer a view of concord, which nevertheless is hospitable to disagreement, but it might be also premised on ideas of justice and respect. Aristotle is not speaking properly of respect, but is sensitive to the fact that in political life, human beings have to reach some sort of agreement on how to direct their lives. Thank you.
Okay. Marco Luca, you go on.
Go ahead, Achille. It's fine.
It's only a curiosity. According to you, Elena, what is the relation between this idea of philia and the book that Derrida wrote, the Politics of Friendship? I don't know, maybe there are a link between the two thinkers, between Aristotle and Derrida, about this idea of philia.
Yeah, well, basically, the main idea, I don't know Derrida very well, but basically, the main idea is that political friendship is also a place in which human beings can put themselves to the test, try to reach solutions, but at the same time, try to express specific views of justice, which might not necessarily be homogeneous. So I think that Derrida is deeply indebted by Aristotle, but obviously we should also try to find a possible interpretation of Aristotle. Okay. But I guess that it has to do with the capacity to find homogeneous procedures, but at the same time try to preserve the richness and the integrity of our perceptions of justice.
Okay, Marco Luca, go ahead.
Thank you, Elena, for a great talk, and it was amazing, and I really look forward to reading more about it. And I'm very sympathetic to this. If I understood you correctly, of course, the sort of idea that solidarity is in a way a local, performed habit, which gives sort of substance to sort of global level justice, so to speak. I was just wondering, and along the lines that Achille already sort of touched upon briefly, but maybe it's a sort of misguided question, but nevertheless, maybe just for you to clarify a bit, or to pick your brain about it. Sort of when we have competing claims of justice, when we have this disagreement, then I'm not sure what happens with solidarity in this situation. If we have this sort of, I don't know, of a good example, but maybe sort of Amartya Sen's this parable of children with the flute, and then who gets the flute, then we have different sort of evaluative standards, and then one should have the flute because they build it, and the other should have it because they play it best and everybody will enjoy it, or they need it the most or something. So, but then we have to be in some way in relation to some of them more than some others in order to enact this justice. So I'm just wondering what happens to solidarity in this respect.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you very much. I don't even know whether I am able to answer, but I might try. Well, first of all, the problem when talking about solidarity, as I said at the very beginning of my talk, is who is supposed to have a duty of solidarity, especially in specific circumstances in which we cannot directly intervene. Now, we might frame the issue in philosophical terms by reference to the idea of perfect and imperfect duties. Here I am using perfect and imperfect duties in a Kantian sense, but not only in a Kantian sense, because in Kant, an imperfect duty obeys to respect for the moral law, but it is not necessarily to be instantiated in the sphere of law. Whereas a perfect duty has to do with what is required of us, even by right. But there is also another way of talking about perfect and imperfect duties. And here I am referring to Honora O'Neill, a contemporary thinker who is drawing a distinction between perfect and imperfect duties in the sense of having duties, but not knowing who is required to act. So I don't think there is a specific, well, there might be possible possible solutions, possible perspectives, practical perspectives. The problem is what is political philosophy designed to do, because political philosophy should try somehow to offer theorizations. So what I might wish that political philosophy could do is to set the conditions, which the normative conditions for a public discussion on who should take responsibility. So this communication might be done at the level of national leaders, but also relationships between single states and supranational organizations. So there is no solution, but at the same time, we might start framing this issue in terms of imperfect duties, which need to be brought in the domain of perfect duties. So in that way, people can be actually recognized in their instances. Here I am thinking of Achilles' question on Derrida. Now it came up to my mind that Derrida talks a lot about intimacy, but also the need to be recognized in his politics of friendship. He says this. Of course, the politics of friendship also involves some sort of enmity and also some sort of conflict, but I guess that the task of political philosophy should be the one of trying to reduce conflicts and disagreements to a minimum, and try to put the sphere of imperfect duties within a new frame, progressively driving towards perfect duties.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very
There's
much.
someone else? Question, curiosity, or anything else? No, nothing. Okay. Thank you, Elena, for the talks. Thank you all.
Thanks very much for having me. It was a
And we'll
pleasure.
see you next week for our weekly seminar. Thank you so much to all. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.